Hello, folks. I'm Spencer Elliott, and welcome to Spencer's Bookshelf. Today is April 28th, 2020, and this is the first episode on my YouTube channel, which reviews books that I've read. Just a bit of background of myself. Work in the finance industry. I do a lot of active things. I run, rock climb, things like that. But one thing I love to do is read. I find reading is something that can take you away. It can challenge your thoughts. It can make you expand your consciousness, expand yourself as a human being. And whether it's fiction, nonfiction, or books on special interests, I think reading is a great way to be true to oneself in terms of being able to be with your own thoughts and to be able to challenge yourself. I mean, the idea behind reading is being able to look at someone else's perspective, and I think that that's a very important thing in this day and age. As you know, being April 28th, 2020, we are going through the COVID crisis right now. I don't want to discuss too much about that because it is what it is. It's been a tough time, I think, for everyone, some even more than others. Thank you to all essential workers. You guys are amazing. Nurses, doctors, grocery workers, delivery drivers, you guys are amazing. So on that note, I wanted to start this channel because reading is something that is something that's important to me, and I think at this time we're all at home, we're all trying to physically distance. It's also good to not social distance. And I think because of us being alone a lot more as human beings, reading is a great way to let us escape the reality of what we're going through right now. So on that note, just a little bit of background on why I have Spencer's Bookshelf. Well, firstly, my parents moved, from Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. My parents moved from Winnipeg to Oakville, Ontario, which is a suburb outside of Toronto, in 2010, so about 10 years ago. And they had a lot of books they had to get rid of. And they were going to donate a lot of the books, which they did. But I took on a lot of them because I wanted to, I felt it was important that I start reading a lot of different types of books. I just finished university at the time, took political science and economics. I thought, you know what, it's time to expand the consciousness and for myself and read the Grishams, the big authors and things like that. So today I wanted to review a couple books that I've read in the last week. One of them I read last weekend. The other book I read the weekend before. And actually, I find during COVID right now, it's been a time where I've been reading books at a pretty fast pace. I normally read about 1 to 2 books a month, and now I find I'm reading 1 to 2 books a week. And I find that I read multiple books at once, generally a fiction and a nonfiction, or if it's nonfiction, either a psychology book or a book on economics or a political book itself. And actually, two of the books I wanted to review today were both nonfiction books. One of them, they're both based in the UK, British authors talking about their own life experiences, but very different people, extremely different people. First book I'm going to review today is For the Record by David Cameron. So this is a book, it's kind of a memoir that he did, as he's no longer, or he was the Prime Minister of the UK from 2010 to 2017. Pretty prolific leader in the sense that he's the reason why Brexit is happening. He is not a Brexit supporter, but he started the referendum and was instituted the referendum which led to the breakup of Britain from the European Union and things like that. Of course, this book is much more than just the referendum. It talks about his tenure as Prime Minister, talks a lot about some of the social policies, some of the his economic policies, things like that, which I liked. I will say, though, I wasn't a fan of the book as a whole, though. And the reason being is um, Brexit was a very consequential thing in the last few years. It's affected the world in many ways, not just England. And he's the reason why it was allowed to happen. Him calling the referendum as his way of appeasing people in his party, the Conservative Party in UK. That was his call. And I thought in this book it would be a nice philosophical way in which he could sort of talk about why he did what he did, his thought process behind it, maybe an admittance of, okay, this was a bad decision. I think the book fell very, very short on that. He didn't explain why he did what he did. He explained what he did in very good detail, but the why was what's missing. And I think as a British Prime Minister, I mean, I know he's no Churchill or no Margaret Thatcher or Tony Blair. I don't want to be good on both sides of the political spectrum there. But those are prolific British Prime Ministers that I think everyone in the world has heard of. David Cameron, I don't think constitutes that level. And based on reading this book, I was quite... I wasn't very impressed with what he did, or impressed with the book. Also, not really impressed with what he did, but I'm not impressed with the book. On a side note as well, I mean, it's a 700 or 800 page book, actually more than that, and I read it in like 4 days, which means it was an easy read. Where if you're reading a book from a prime minister or former prime minister, I think it would be a bit more in depth, where you'd want to have to read it at a slow pace in order to get all the details. I found I got all the details reading it at a fast pace, which shows the level of writing that he does. And for that note, based on the writing and on the content and on the decisions he made and why he hasn't explained why he made the decisions he made, and especially when there's a lot of issues with what he's done, I give this book a 2 out of 10. Or sorry, 2 out of 5. Rating them out of 5. So 2 stars for David Cameron. Second book that we're going to talk about, it's completely different. It's The Pleasure Groove, or In the Pleasure Groove, also known as Love, Death, and Duran. So this is a book written by John Taylor, the bassist from Duran. Also, side note, I play bass. I'm not the greatest yet, but as a result of COVID, I've been practicing almost daily. He's one of the reasons actually I started learning bass, and a lot of what I learned in bass is a lot of Duran songs, because they kind of mix a bunch of genres, so I can learn a bit of different techniques as a result of their kind of mix mash of rock, new wave, a little bit of reggae mixed in with a little bit of funk. There's a lot of different aspects to that. But to the book, it was a great book. It was a fantastic book. John Taylor is by no means a... he doesn't speak as of, or write like Shakespeare by any stretch of the imagination. He's a rock star, or former rock star. He also had a big drug problem, which I appreciate the way in which he talks about it in the book, because he, unlike Cameron, was extremely open and honest, and there was a why to a lot of what he was talking about. His memoir goes back from, so the band itself, Duran, was probably the biggest band in the world, or in the top, I'd say, 5 biggest bands in the world between 1981 and 1985. They split up in 85, had a little bit of a recurrence in 93, and then reformed again in 2001, where they've been doing basically reunion tour for about 20 years. But they were basically the biggest band in the world from 81 to 85, which was after disco was done, but before sort of the late 80s hair metal, hair bands were starting to get into place. So they were right in the dead set of new wave. One thing I like about the book is he starts the book in the 70s time period. So when the band was forming, he talks a lot about how it came about, which I thought was really interesting. He's very detailed in a lot of the accounts that happen, which I really appreciate. One of the structures of the book that I like too is that it's done in very short chapters. So you can read it for like 10 minutes and you've already read like 3 chapters. So even if you just want to read something for a few minutes before bed, you can get a chapter in. And I like that about it. I mean, frankly, I read it in 2 days. But on that note, it was really good. It talks, he really lays his heart out in the book in terms of the ups and downs that he went through, especially in the mid-'80s when Duran was breaking up and he had a cocaine problem, things like that. But I honestly got to give him props. He did a great job. He's a very interesting human being. Still is a very interesting human being. And it was really neat to see his perspective too on the different people in the band. It was a band that had 5 equals. 3 of them with the last name Taylor, not related. Roger, John, which this book's written by John Taylor, and Andy Taylor, who's the guitarist, and then Simon Le Bon and Nick Rhodes. Nick Rhodes and John Taylor are actually the people who started the band, and the others came on board itself. But yeah, I highly recommend it. Even if you don't like Duran, even if you don't know much about them, I feel like there's a lot of good historical nature in this in terms of the 80s, and especially when it comes to nightclub culture and stuff in the late 70s and early 80s, and drug culture, and also music culture. I mean, there's so much interesting stuff in this book. So I'm giving this book 4.5 out of 5. I give it a 5 out of 5, but I don't like giving things 5 out of 5. I want to be a harder marker. Giving things 5 out of 5, I don't think should ever exist. No one's ever perfect. But this book, pretty damn close. That's my show today. Thank you for listening, and there will be more in the future.